And so, it's 5 years since the referendum on our future in the EU. Although Scotland clearly voted to remain, the overall UK voted to leave, so we did. Today, the European Union says a welcome awaits if we choose to go back. Taming COVID, Scotland's Freedom Day is Monday the 9th of August. Conservatives claim the government has no vision for education. And there's a multi-million-pound boost for Scottish tourism. From Caledonia Media, I'm Charles Fletcher with Scotland's favourite political show, The Week in Holyrood.
My heart breaks for every business, every individual, every sector of our society that is still suffering from COVID. But I don't do my job properly by rushing decisions that will make the situation worse. I do my job properly, no matter how difficult these decisions are, by trying to get us safely to that end point. And that's what I'm going to dedicate every day to doing until we're at it.
Matanda, Fiskama. Welcome to the final edition of the season as we head into the summer recess at Holyrood. As predicted last time, the easing of COVID restrictions is being postponed into the middle of next month. The First Minister says she has no option. It comes as a row between two senior politicians plays out in the media world in Scotland and England. Nicola Sturgeon is working to protect Scots from COVID. Andy Burnham is taking the hump at her blocking travel between his town and hers. It's a fabricated spat that Labour and the Conservatives seek to exploit. Here's the First Minister.
I have a duty, it's one I take very seriously, to keep Scotland as safe as possible. I'm sure Andy Burnham feels that same sense of duty towards people in the Greater Manchester area. I've always got on well with Andy Burnham. If he wants a grown-up conversation, he only has to pick up the phone. But if, as I suspect might be the case, this is more about generating a spat with me as part of some positioning in a Labour leadership contest of the future, then I'm not interested.
The Mayor of Manchester says he's furious that the First Minister bans travel from Manchester to Scotland. Andy Burnham is angry and he wants compensation for individuals and business.
I was really disappointed on Friday that the First Minister of Scotland just announced out of the blue, as far as we were concerned, a travel ban, saying that people couldn't travel from Scotland to Manchester and Salford and people couldn't go the other way. You know, that is exactly what the SNP always accused the Westminster government of doing, you know, just kind of riding roughshod over people. The SNP are treating the north of England with the same contempt in just kind of bringing that in without any consultation with us.
Can I gently suggest to you that disappointed doesn't quite capture your mood when you heard that? You were furious, weren't you? How did you feel when you saw Scottish football fans dancing and partying in the streets of London when they're banned from the streets of Manchester?
Well, I just think it's double standards. It's as simple as that. It's hypocrisy because, you know, they've done to us exactly what they always complain that the UK government does to Scotland. So I'll be writing to the First Minister today. I'll be asking for compensation for the individuals who might lose holidays and the businesses who might lose bookings. You know, why should a couple from Salford who are double jabbed, who are about to go on a walking holiday in Scotland, not be able to go? It's completely disproportionate in my view. We could have come up with a different arrangement if the First Minister had been in touch with us. But the second thing I'll say to her is, you know, we need an arrangement here. The Scottish Government can't just impose things on parts of the north of England with no discussion with us. That is simply wrong, and they need to live by the same standards that they've always called for from others.
Here, Nicola Sturgeon has delayed further opening of the country.
We must remember that this is a global pandemic. It will not be completely over here until it is over across the world. Unfortunately, the world is still some way from that. However, here in Scotland, while transmission is causing concern at the moment, vaccination is giving us much of the protection that only harsh restrictions have been able to give us so far. So that means we can now plan to move much more firmly and with much greater confidence from the need to control the virus through tough restrictions to being able to live much more freely. That is good news. We must be careful still, but from the 19th of July and then more substantially from the 9th of August, assuming we are meeting our revised strategic aim of alleviating the harm of the virus, life should feel much, much less restricted for all of us. A very significant degree of normality will be restored for individuals and for businesses. As I said earlier, these are indicative dates, but they allow us to plan ahead with more clarity. As always, though, we all have a part to play in keeping us on track. So I will end with a reminder of the key asks of everyone across the country. The first is vaccination. Please get vaccinated when invited to do so, and please attend for both doses. If you need to rearrange, or if you think you should have had an invitation by now, please go to the vaccination section of the NHS Inform website. If you've had your first dose of the vaccine 8 weeks or more ago, check on the website to see if you can bring your second dose forward. Secondly, please do test yourself regularly. Free lateral flow tests are available through NHS Inform. They can be ordered through the post or collected from local and regional test sites, and also now, of course, from community pharmacies. If you test positive, please self-isolate and get the result confirmed through a PCR test. And finally, please continue to stick to the rules where you live and follow all the public health advice. This is still really important. The virus is still out there and it is spreading, so please continue to follow advice on physical distancing, hand washing and face coverings. Try to meet others outdoors as much as possible. We know that no environment is entirely risk-free, but outdoors is much less risky than indoors. If you are meeting indoors, though, please stick to the limits for now and make sure the room is well ventilated. Presiding Officer, 6 months ago, when I confirmed to Parliament that tough restrictions were being reimposed, it was the day after the winter solstice, the shortest night of the year. That was one of the darkest moments in the course of this pandemic. For these past 15 months, we have endured restrictions that would have been considered impossible just 2 years ago. The pain suffered and the people lost along the way must never be forgotten. They will never be forgotten. And in a global pandemic, we can't be certain that there won't be difficult moments yet to come. But I hope and I believe that today's statement, just of course a day after the summer solstice, marks a positive turning point. We are now living in more hopeful times. We can now see a route to lifting restrictions and to enjoying again the simple but precious pleasures that we've all missed so much. The path ahead is not obstacle-free. I'm not going to pretend it is, but it is clearer now than at any point so far. Thanks to vaccines, normal life is now much closer. It is within sight. So let's all stick with it and do whatever is required to get us there.
The Scottish Conservatives say the SNP has no real vision for education. Their leader, Douglas Ross, claims the First Minister has lost her way on schooling and her end-of-term report card shows nothing but failure. Major reforms are already planned and announced, including scrapping and replacing the Scottish Qualifications Authority. This week, the independent body, the OECD, gave a withering report to the government's delivery of the Curriculum for Excellence. Douglas Ross says the government could do better.
As schools across Scotland prepare to break up for the summer, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank them for all they've done to support young people in extremely challenging circumstances over the last year, often with little or no help from this government. 3 weeks ago, the First Minister told this Parliament she had full confidence in the SQA. It's now being scrapped. What happened in that time to change your mind? First Minister.
Well, firstly, as I did on Tuesday in this chamber, can I reiterate, with no equivocation, with no snark attached to it, can I just say straightforwardly a big thank you to teachers, to all support staff in our schools, to parents and to young people. This has been the most difficult year any of them will ever remember, both professionally for those who work in our education system and for those who are learning in our education system. I can never find the words to thank them enough, but I hope everyone knows how deeply appreciative everyone in the Scottish Government, and I'm sure everyone across Scotland is, for everything they have done. Sometimes, and it's one of the things, the longer I'm in politics, I'm going to be candid here, Presiding Officer, the more frustrated I often get at the inability of our political discourse, and we're all responsible for our political discourse, to engage in nuanced arguments that are not just binary, black or white. It is perfectly consistent to say that in terms of what the SQA is doing,
we'll hear
and
the
also
First
the
Minister.
inability to take serious issues seriously in a parliamentary chamber. I do have confidence in the work the SQA is doing around the certification of national qualifications, and I think that's important not just for me to say, for my assurance as First Minister, but it's really important for me to say that for the benefit of young people and their parents right across this country, and I say that again today. But it is also the case that I think the time has come, and we have accepted the recommendation of the OECD in this respect, and of course the Education Secretary made a statement in this chamber earlier this week to say that it is time for reform, and therefore we have given a commitment that we will consider carefully the nature and the detail of this, but we will replace the SQA and we will also remove the inspection function from Education Scotland. I think all of that, taken in the round, is how people, whether they agree or disagree with every decision this government takes, is how they would expect a grown-up, responsible government to behave, and that is how this government will always conduct itself.
Douglas Ross.
There is absolutely nothing grown-up or responsible to claim you have changed your mind on the quality of the SQA because of an OECD report that you haven't just had for the last 3 weeks. This government have had it for months. They had it before the election that we've just been through. And of course, that damning OECD report criticised the confusing and unhelpful communication given to schools. And is it really any wonder? Nicola Sturgeon said she had full confidence in the SQA, so she scrapped it. It's just another example of a government that has lost its way in education, that says one thing and does another, with no real vision of where they're going or how they get there. This is the final chance in Parliament, before courses start next term, for the First Minister to give young people and teachers who face so much uncertainty over the last year a clear answer. Will there be traditional exams next year?
First Minister.
I'm sorry if the complexities of these arguments are sometimes a bit challenging for Douglas Ross in this chamber. But most people listening to this will realise that for a First Minister to say, as I have done and as I will repeat again today, that I have confidence in the SQA's work around the certification of qualifications this year. And that's a really important message for every young person waiting on their grades. And of course, young people will be getting their grades over the course of this week and into tomorrow. But that it is time for reform more generally. And we are reflecting on the arguments that have been made across this chamber and, of course, on the report of the OECD. And we have come to a decision that it is right now to move ahead to replace the SQA, but to do that carefully with proper consideration of the detail of what that replacement is. I think that is an argument that most people will understand. On the question of what will happen in terms of exams next year, if I was to stand here right now and give, while we are still in the grip of COVID, where we have rising cases, although increasing vaccination that we hope will keep that under control, if I was to stand here in a knee-jerk, ill-considered way, decide now what is to happen for exams next year, then I think people across the country would be right to criticise me for doing that. That would not be the responsible, considered thing to do instead. And the Education Secretary set this out in Parliament. We will consider this as COVID develops over the summer, and we will set that out in August so that schools, as they return, know what the situation is going to be. Again, I think the responsible way to proceed. And finally, Presiding Officer, the OECD report is an important publication, and I think every member of this Parliament I know has and will continue to pay close attention to it. But let me just provide some balance and some context that, if we were only to listen to Mr Ross, would be completely and utterly lacking. So everything I'm about to say now is quoting from the OECD report. Curriculum for Excellence continues to be a bold and widely supported initiative. It is an inspiring example equated with good curriculum practice. Scotland is ranked amongst higher than average country performance on international assessments, usually scoring at or above OECD average in mathematics, reading and science. Education is a source of pride in Scotland. So yes, there are challenges to be addressed, there are reforms that are needed, and this government will take them forward. But opposition leaders, I think, occasionally should recognise the strengths in the Scottish education system for the benefit of young people across our country.
Douglas Ross.
The OECD report
Thank you. Thank you. We'll hear Mr Ross.
Thank you. The OECD report is so important and so crucial that Nicola Sturgeon kept it in her drawer over the election period to make sure there could be no challenge on her government's shambolic record in education. And of course, in all the quotes that she read out there, she didn't read out the one from the OECD report that said confusing and unhelpful communication had been given to schools. That one slipped the briefing from the First Minister. But she also says she can't stand up and give a definitive answer to young people whether they will face exams or not next year, and that would be irresponsible. Yet the First Minister stood up at that desk earlier on this week to give us as a country a route map out of restrictions. So on one hand, we know how we get out of the restrictions of COVID-19, but young people are left in limbo with no answers as to whether they will sit traditional exams or not next year. But let's have a look at what Scotland's experts on education are saying about this. Keir Bloomer, who helped write the Curriculum for Excellence, said, if the government go too far, we will see a fall in standards. And Edinburgh University Professor Lindsay Patterson said, I'm really sorry that the Deputy First Minister of Scotland and a Scottish Government Minister are criticising an independent expert in education before I am even able to say. And John Swinney has the gall to nod his head. Perhaps if he had listened to Lindsay Patterson, he wouldn't have been sacked as Education Secretary. Because Lindsay Patterson said it is unlikely that a system that relied wholly on coursework would ever command public confidence. Scottish Conservatives firmly believe that traditional exams are the best and fairest way for young people to show what they know and what they can do. Does the First Minister agree?
First Minister.
I agree that we have to get all of this right, and traditional exams, absolutely, we have to consider their place in the future of qualifications very carefully. No decisions have been taken around that, and one of the reasons no decisions have been taken around that is we're awaiting a further report from the OECD in August, which will help to inform those decisions going forward. I don't know whether Douglas Ross was just unaware of that, but there we go. On the many questions there, I'm going to quickly run through all of them. I am not shying away from the tough messages in the OECD report, and we have accepted all of the recommendations of the OECD report, and I think that is evidence of that. The timing of the report, I know Douglas Ross wasn't a member of this Parliament before the election, but this was canvassed fairly extensively before the election. The timing of the publication of the OECD report was entirely a matter for the independent OECD, and before the election some of the correspondence was actually put into spice so that members could see what the OECD were saying about that. Had we, against the wishes, actually, I'll put it a bit more strongly than that, against the instruction of the OECD, published the report anyway, then I'm sure the Conservatives would have been amongst the first to get to their feet to criticise us for going against an independent organisation. In terms of exams next year, this is a really important decision. What I set out on Tuesday was a contingent route map. I very much hope that we can meet those deadlines and get the country back to normal. But decisions around things like exams next year will be dependent on whether or not we can meet those milestones. It is right and proper and essential that we take these decisions in proper order. There have been many young people having to self-isolate over the last few weeks. We want to hopefully reduce that as we go into the new academic term, but we have to take account of the wider COVID situation and take these decisions properly. So that's what we will continue to do, and I think, as I say, whether people agree or disagree with the ultimate decisions, that is the way in which people would want us to approach it. And finally, Presiding Officer, I don't ignore the comments of Lindsay Patterson or Keir Bloomer. We take account of those views and comments, as we do a range of views and comments. So let me just offer some others. The parents group Connect, pleased that the OECD team could see that education is a source of pride in Scotland, and that there's a huge commitment to improving children's lives through education. The NASUWT looking forward to working with the Government to build on the many strengths the OECD has rightly identified. The Scottish Youth Parliament saying that it offers Scottish education an opportunity going forward. So there is a variety of views. The OECD had many good things to say about the strengths of Scottish education, and actually it is possible to recognise that while also saying that there are real challenges to address and to overcome, and this Government is going to do both. And actually it's that prospectus that we put before the Scottish people just a few weeks ago and were roundly re-elected to deliver on.
Douglas Ross.
So on the specific question of the future of exams in Scotland, the First Minister said, and I wrote this down to quote her correctly, she will consider their place in education going forward. After being in government for 14 years, First Minister for 7, and having pledged education would be her #1 priority, I think people across Scotland will expect the First Minister to be able to quite clearly say if she is for or against exams. But she absolutely did not in that answer. Her government no longer seems to value traditions that have served us well, that helped the First Minister and I get from a great local school to this Parliament. Our education system has always been distinct. It's uniquely our own, a cornerstone of what makes us Scottish. If the SNP remove the focus on fundamentals, if they stop valuing core knowledge, if they ditch exams, isn't her government abandoning the very things that made Scotland's schools great?
First Minister.
Well, I'm glad we finally got an admission from Douglas Ross that Scotland's schools are great. So at least we're making some progress. Look, I'll try and say this more straightforwardly. I think exams are important, but firstly, I have been, with my colleagues, been in government for 14 years. But, Presiding Officer, the only reason I'm still in government, standing here as First Minister, is because a matter of weeks ago, the Scottish people re-elected me in a landslide election victory. So they've taken account of all of this and decided that they trust this government to take Scotland forward in all of these matters. On the issue of exams, what I think is the most important principle is that we, like any country, have a robust and respected system for awarding qualifications to young people. But it is the case, whether I like it or not, that there is a debate in Scotland right now about what the correct balance between traditional exams and continuous assessment is in ensuring that we have that robust system. We've asked the OECD to do further work. They will report to us in August. We will take account of all of that, and this Parliament then will have the opportunity to debate this. The core principle here, though, is the quality of the system that gives young people qualifications, and that is the outcome we should all be focused on, and we shouldn't fear a real debate about the best way of doing that. So that's what we will take forward, and we look forward to views right across this Parliament.
Labour leader Anas Sarwar says Nicola Sturgeon has lost her grip on communications about the pandemic. He says mixed messages are confusing people across the country.
The Government has previously communicated well during this pandemic, but that has started to slip, risking public trust and confidence. In recent weeks, we have allowed 3,000 football fans to attend a fan zone, but said parents can't attend an outdoor sports day. Trampoline centres can open, but soft plays can't. Hospitality venues can open late for penalties, but the Government says it's not safe on other days. And we've had an avoidable public argument between the Scottish Government and the Mayor of Greater Manchester. If we are to navigate the coming months, communications have to be clear and decisions consistent. The Government's own polling says 1 in 5 people don't know what's expected of them. That's before these decisions. We now have the hospitality sector, the aviation sector, the wedding industry, retailers, children's play centres and more all speaking out and expressing frustration. So will the First Minister change your approach, engage and listen to them, and have a can-do approach to this new stage of our pandemic response?
First Minister.
What I will do is avoid easy slogans like can-do approach. I think it's really important that we continue to move forward cautiously. We all want to get back to normal. We have a greater degree of normality than we've had almost at any time in the past 15 months. but there is a further distance to travel. But we have to do that carefully. We can see case numbers today, which of course will be published this afternoon, show another just short of 3,000 cases reported over the course of yesterday. Positivity rate of, I think, 7.7%. So these are rising case numbers, and we've got to be cautious. Communication is really important. Communication as you come out of restrictions and things get hopefully easier in many ways, but more complicated, then communication is more challenging, and nobody knows that better than I do. I will continue to do my level best to communicate clearly with people the reasons why certain decisions are being taken and why some things can happen and other things can, even although that appears to be inconsistent. And as I make use of the media briefings over the summer recess, presiding officer, that I think have stood the country in good stead over the past 15 months, I hope that I won't hear any further criticism for that from Anna Sarwar's deputy, as I have at many points over the past few months, because I agree communication to the public is important. Many of these things that Anna Sarwar has talked about are decisions we reach for pragmatic reasons. The issue of opening times during football matches that might go to penalties is to avoid people crowding out of pubs at the same time while they're still wanting to watch football. It's actually about trying to avert a risk in a pragmatic way. Similarly, with the fan zone, it's about trying to make sure that there is an environment that is relatively safe because of the regulations, recognising that no matter what I say, people want to watch the football. So these things can be, I understand, really difficult for people to understand it, to accept, and I do understand that. But this is possibly one of the most difficult phases of this pandemic as we try to navigate our way from here back to normality, but knowing that there are still a lot of risks that we've got to try to avoid and get round. And the last thing I would say is every single decision we take, although the decisions are the government's and I take responsibility for them, but they are all informed by clinical advice so that we try to get them as right as we possibly can.
Anna Sarwar.
I think the First Minister misses the point. The can-do approach is not about some kind of slogan. It's speak to individual businesses. Every single member will have walked down the Royal Mile to come into the Parliament, and they'll have seen businesses how frustrated they are. That's what I mean by having a can-do approach, because behind every business there are people trying their best to get by. People like Cammy Hudson. Cammy has built a successful wedding photography business. Last year he was meant to have 49 weddings. Instead he had just 6. He says the government doesn't understand his industry, are following a one-size-fits-all approach and refusing to listen. And he's not alone. This year's bookings are all but gone, and because of the uncertainty, people are choosing to book as far as 2023. Cammy can't afford to turn down a job. That's why 2 weeks ago, he found himself driving from Brighton to Inverness overnight in order to accommodate 2 bookings. That meant 39 hours straight awake, working 2 10-hour shifts and being forced to drive 600 miles through the night. That is an unacceptable situation for anyone to be in, having to risk his own health in order to put food on the table and pay the bills. Does the First Minister think that is acceptable?
First Minister.
If you're asking me, do I think any of this is acceptable? No, I don't. I don't think it is acceptable that any of us are having to live through a global pandemic. Every single impact of this is horrendously difficult for the people who are having to bear it. So I'm not going to stand here and try to defend the horrible situations people find themselves in. But what I will say is nobody is doing this to people deliberately or for any reason other than to try in a really difficult situation to keep the country as safe as possible. And we listen as we go. We are in a much greater degree of normality now. The shops in the Royal Mile, just a matter of weeks ago, were completely closed, now open. Of course, trading is not completely normal because people, apart from anything else, still have a degree of nervousness, and we have to encourage the whole country back to normality, but give them a sense of safety as that happens. On weddings, weddings have been, the wedding sector, and we talk about the sector economically, that's really important, but for many couples having to postpone and repostpone weddings, this has been one of the most difficult impacts. And we listen. So, for example, just yesterday, a request has been made by the representative body in the wedding sector to say if we go to level 0 on the 19th of July, can we bring that forward to the 16th so that the weddings that weekend can go forward? We are actively considering things like that so that we are trying to be as flexible. But on the other hand, we know that some outbreaks have originated, understandably, in life event type settings when families are coming together and hugging and doing these kind of things. And they therefore, unfortunately, this is the painful thing about COVID, it's these kind of things that pose the greatest risk. I, like everybody else does, I hate every aspect of this. I hate every decision we have to make that restricts people's ability to live their lives. And no part of me wants to do it for a second longer than necessary. I don't think these decisions, I know these decisions are not easy. I don't pretend that we get every single one of them right. I know we don't because of the nature of what we're trying to do here. But we try to get them right, we listen and we rectify when we are clear we've got something wrong. And that's what we'll continue to try to do. And if all of us continue to pull together, that day when we can lift all restrictions, I do believe is now within sight. But getting from here to there still involves us being cautious and careful. And I know how difficult that is, but I also know how necessary it is.
Anna Sarwar.
Look, I accept we have to be cautious and careful. I'm not saying the Scottish Government needs to defend the decision. I'm not saying the decisions are deliberate. But the First Minister can say she's listening, but the businesses don't believe she's listening. They think she's telling them what they need to do rather than actually engaging with them. She gave the example of the Scottish Wedding Industry Alliance. They themselves said that the decisions don't go far enough and the government is still not communicating effectively with them. Because this is a bit more than financial support. These are businesses and individuals that have spent 15 months working out how to operate safely. It's different if it was just one sector. It's more than just one sector. Sector after sector are now speaking out publicly about the government's poor communication and inconsistent decision-making. The government's current approach is not working for this stage of the pandemic, and it needs to change. We all started this Parliament saying we would focus on recovery. That work has to start now. The vaccine is working, and we have spent the last year building up our testing and our tracing capacity. So will the government change their approach, have a can-do attitude demanded by people across the country, stop the inconsistency, get round the table, engage with these businesses and individuals, and start the important work of rebuilding our country?
First Minister.
John Swinney was round the table with these stakeholders this morning. We do that regularly and will continue to do that. We listen. I readily concede that there will be many things that business ask us to do that we consider and can't do. And the reason for that is not because we're not listening. The reason for that is down to the one thing, no matter how much I wish I could, I cannot do. And that is simply magic away this virus. I can't, if I could do that, I would do it in an instant. So we have to continue to take careful decisions. Anna Sarwar says the vaccines are working. All of the evidence says the vaccines are working, and we are vaccinating as fast as supplies allow, but we continue to have, although it's reducing every day, a significant proportion of the population that is not yet fully vaccinated. That is why cases are going up again. I've just said 2,999 cases from yesterday will be reported today. We hope that will not translate into hospital admissions in the way that kind of case number would have earlier in the year because of the vaccine. But I said, reported to this Parliament earlier this week, that 10% of cases were translating into hospital admissions earlier this year. It's now down to 5%. That is really, really positive news. But 5% of a daily case rate of 3,000 is still a massive number heading into our hospitals. That's loss for people. That's pain and suffering as well as pressure on the NHS. So this phase is the most difficult phase because we are on the route back to normality. We can see, hopefully, the finishing line in August. But getting from here to there demands care and caution because what will be determined by how we behave in the short term is not whether we get to that finishing line. The vaccines are going to get us there. I am confident of that. But what will be determined is how many more lives are lost between now and then, how much pressure we put on our National Health Service and how many more families have to suffer the pain that too many have suffered already. My heart breaks for every business, every individual, every sector of our society that is still suffering from COVID. But I don't do my job properly by rushing decisions that will make the situation worse. I do my job properly, no matter how difficult these decisions are, by trying to get us safely to that end point. And that's what I'm going to dedicate every day to doing until we're at it.
You're listening to The Week in Holyrood from Caledonia Media. I'm Charles Fletcher. And still to come in the next half hour, a multi-million-pound boost for Scotland's tourism industry as we head towards reopening the country on the 9th of August. The co-leader of the Scottish Greens, Lorna Slater, took a swipe at the Amazon facility in Dunfermline. She brought up concerns about what she defined as an obscene amount of waste at the site. Ms Slater wants to know why the Scottish Government is continuing to give financial support to the online retailer.
This week, ITN revealed that the Amazon warehouse in Dunfermline is destroying millions of new unsold items, including televisions, laptops and face covering. This level of waste is obscene. In 2020 alone, Amazon's net profits were over $20 billion. It is a company that has refused to pay the living wage, uses zero-hour contracts and keeps its workers in such a state of desperation that some of them are reduced to sleeping in tents. It is a company that has resisted trade unions and avoids paying corporation tax. The Scottish Greens have previously challenged the millions of pounds of public money given to Amazon through Scottish enterprise. In the last financial year, the Scottish Government gave them £4.7 million for web services. Can the First Minister tell us when her government will stop giving Amazon money?
First Minister.
We attach, as Lorna Slater knows, and as many rightly across the Chamber have called for, and we increasingly attach fair work conditions to all of the grant support that Scottish Enterprise or any of our enterprise agencies give. I don't have in front of me, I'm happy to look into the details of the particular support that Lorna Slater has referenced and look at what conditions, what exactly that was for and what conditions are attached to that. So we will continue to make sure that any taxpayer money that is going to businesses is about creating, not just creating jobs, but creating fair jobs, and that companies are being challenged as well as supported. On the broader point about Amazon, clearly I'm not responsible for the practices of Amazon, but we had a report just yesterday from Zero Waste about consumption and about the need to become much more sustainable as a country and as a society. We all have a duty to do that, but companies certainly do, and destroying things in the way that has been reported this week, I do think, raises real questions about the acceptability of that.
Lorna Slater.
Thank you, First Minister. Only yesterday, the Minister told me that he wants to see public money going to companies that treat their employees well. Public money should be going to small companies and those who need it to recover from the pandemic. At the heart of this obscene level of waste is an economy that puts a disposable, throwaway culture ahead of the needs of people and planet. It is shocking that a company of this size would rather destroy new items than give them away to people in need. This shocking revelation underlines that governments must do more to force companies to reduce waste with regulation and fines where they are failing to act. Will the First Minister commit to enshrining the circular economy in robust laws that will prevent such needless volumes of waste in the future?
First Minister.
Well, I think our commitments to a circular economy and legislating for a circular economy are known, and I look forward to taking that forward with cooperation across the Parliament. I agree with the comments in terms of what's been reported about Amazon. I do think governments have to do more to persuade everybody to lead by example, to persuade individuals and certainly to persuade companies to cut down on waste and to become much more responsible environmentally more generally. But I don't think any company the size and scale of Amazon should need a government to tell it that it shouldn't be destroying large amounts of things that could actually be, and Lorna Slater's right, given to people in need. So I would hope Amazon will reflect very carefully on that. There's a big challenge for all governments right across the world on this, and Scotland, I hope, will lead by example. And similarly on fair work. As I say, I'm not sure the detail of the financial support, whether it is a grant or perhaps procurement for services or something like that. I'll look into that. But it is really important that we attach fair work conditions to any support that government is giving companies.
And so let's go to that tourism boost. The Scottish Government is supporting the sector with a £25 million recovery package. A spokesman tells the Week in Holyrood, as we are being encouraged to take staycations this year, there will be specific support for rural communities. This is to help them cope with increased numbers looking to enjoy Scotland's countryside. Jenny Minto, SNP, Argyll and Bute, says tourism is vital to Scotland's economy.
Yes, and I believe the Scottish Government is doing that. It's announced various funding packages to support rural areas, to ensure that we've got the right infrastructure and facilities there. They've also been supporting businesses through the lockdown for non-domestic rates relief. So there's been a variety of packages that the Scottish Government have provided, and I think that's very, very important. I was speaking to a hotelier on Isla, and he very much appreciated the response and the speed of response that he got from the local authority, Argyll and Bute, who were managing the funds. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It's a key string to Scotland's bow, and welcoming people and ensuring that we have the places for them to stay and the places for them to visit is open and running safely under COVID restrictions is so important. And I know a lot of work has been done by both B&Bs, hotels, guest houses and attractions to ensure that they are COVID safe and their visitors feel comfortable and confident in where they're visiting and staying.
Donald Cameron, Conservative Highlands and Islands, wants more done to support the sector.
Especially after the 18 months that we've had. You know, we've had such a disastrous year or more in terms of tourists coming to the Highlands and Islands, but Argyll and Bute and Dunoon and Cowal as well. And we really need now this is absolutely the prime time when the Scottish Government should step forward.
And we can't really afford to lose this season, this summer into autumn season, can we?
We can't afford to lose it at all, because we've lost so much already. Essentially, we lost much of the summer. We've people talk about the 3 winters that maybe tourism businesses will have to endure. That's last summer, the long winter that we've just had, and then this summer. And it's absolutely imperative that tourism is given all the help it needs, so it can make use of the summer and attract visitors to Cowal and to Dunoon in particular as the summer months progress. Obviously, in a safer way as possible, given that we're still living under a certain degree of restrictions due to the pandemic.
Now back into the chamber as we continue our coverage of the final session of questions to the First Minister before summer recess. Presiding Officer Alison Johnston.
Question number 4, Neil Gray.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what discussions the Scottish Government has had with the UK Government, the Post Office and CJ Lang regarding the proposed closure of 31 Post Office branches across Scotland.
First Minister.
Well, this unfortunate decision, and I think it is that to roll out a programme of post office closures up until February next year is a commercial one made by CJ Lang and Son. As postal services, of course, are a reserved matter, the Scottish Government wasn't involved in this decision-making process, but the Minister for Public Finance, Planning and Community Wealth recently met with Post Office Limited to seek assurances around continuity of services to any community affected by closure. He also met representatives from CJ Lang and Son to seek assurances around the remaining post office branches within their sparse stores and confirm that no job losses will be suffered as a result of these closures.
Neil Gray.
I thank the First Minister for her answer. Yesterday I wrote to the Post Office on behalf of a cross-party group of MSPs and MPs asking the Post Office to do all it can to engage quickly with CJ Lang to see if any of these 31 Spar-based branches can be saved. This is especially important for communities like Allington in my Eardronshots constituency, where the Spar store is the only realistic option for a post office branch. So will the First Minister therefore agree to continue doing what she can to quickly bring both players and the UK Government, who has responsibility, to the table and look at all options to save these crucial post offices across Scotland?
First Minister.
Yes, I'm happy to agree to do that. I certainly agree that these proposed closures will have a big impact on the local communities, and I certainly would urge all parties involved, including the UK Government, to look at the matter again. As I mentioned in my previous answer, there has already been ministerial contact with senior representatives both from CJ Lang and the Post Office, but we will make sure that those contacts continue and bring people together to explore what is possible. Scottish Government officials also continue to have regular dialogue with officials in the UK Government and Post Office Limited around this issue more generally, and I've asked to be kept fully updated on them.
Question number 5, Rachel Hamilton.
To ask the First Minister what action the Scottish Government is taking to curb the decline of iconic woodland bird species in Scotland.
First Minister.
Addressing the twin challenges of biodiversity loss and climate change is a central priority for the Government. While the index of abundance for Scottish terrestrial breeding birds shows that the long-term trend for woodland birds in Scotland is increasing, and it's likely that this will continue as we deliver our targets to expand forest cover and create new native woodland, population numbers for some woodland bird species do continue to be a concern. We've been taking action to address this, for example, by providing specific support for capercaillie from the Forestry Grant Scheme between 2016 and 2025, and also funding through the previous Rural Priority Scheme's capercaillie package.
Rachel Hamilton.
I thank the First Minister for that answer. First Minister, nature is under threat. It's not just the capercaillie. It is our waders, our plovers, our curlews. And your government has failed to meet 11 of the 20 achy biodiversity targets. Farmers have told me that they can be a part of the solution to this climate change crisis. And your government has sat on their hands for too long. There is a climate emergency. The custodians of our land are key to protect and meet these biodiversity targets. So today, will she commit to give clarity on agricultural policy, and will she ensure biodiversity targets are improved by extending the Agri-Environment Climate Scheme beyond 2024 to protect these iconic bird species?
First Minister.
I think this is a really important issue. It is the case that for some species there is real cause for concern, and I've recognised that. It's also the case, just as a matter of fact, that for other species we are seeing an increase, for some increases of over 400%. But it's important that where there are declines, and the biggest long-term increase, which is more than 50%, is for capercaillie. But on the specifics, obviously we consider funding both in the short term and the long term to make sure we're supporting these objectives. We face right now a climate and a biodiversity crisis. They are obviously very closely linked, and this Government is very serious about addressing both of them, doing what we need to do here, but in doing that also setting an example for the rest of the world. And I hope that the question and the tone of the question, which I welcome, is a signal that when it comes to the detail of what is needed to meet these things, we will have perhaps more than we have had in the past. Support from the Scottish Conservatives instead of what we've seen recently, which is scaremongering around, talks with the Greens about what that might mean, instead of all of us actually recognising that this. I know the Conservatives don't like it when we actually talk about the detail of some of this stuff, but instead of willing the ends, we have to be prepared to do the means, and that is harder. It is often controversial, but I hope this question, as I say, and the tone of it I really welcome, signals a change of heart from the Scottish Conservatives.
Question number 6, Jackie Baillie.
To ask the First Minister how the Scottish Government is supporting the NHS in light of reports of wards being full and an increase in patients with serious and complex conditions.
First Minister.
Remobilising and supporting the NHS is one of the top priorities for this, and I'm sure for governments across the UK, and indeed in terms of health services for governments across the world. We will shortly publish our NHS recovery plan, which will set out how we will continue to support patients to receive the highest quality of care and expand NHS capacity. The pandemic has had a significant impact on the ability of the NHS to operate normally for the past 15 months, and that has consequences. But I want to thank our NHS staff for the work they continue to do to make sure people in need of urgent care get that, and they are also working flat out to get care and treatment to people who saw it delayed due to COVID. To help staff, a range of wellbeing and mental health resources has been put in place locally, which staff tell us they value. These services are supplemented by national resources, such as the National Wellbeing Hub, which has more than 100,000 users, and we will continue to put in place the support that staff require.
Jackie Baillie.
I welcome the NHS recovery plan being on its way, but these problems are happening now. Consultants in A&E are seeing more people with more chronic and undiagnosed conditions presenting as emergencies. They warn that medical beds are at 120 to 130% capacity, and that has an impact on elective surgery, and the number of people waiting over a year for operations has almost doubled. Activity is below pre-pandemic levels, which is understandable, but in some areas there are simply not enough hospital beds to cope with even those admissions. So what is the First Minister's response to staff who are worried that they do not have the capacity to treat all the patients coming through the door?
First Minister.
So the NHS generally is getting much closer now to pre-pandemic capacity. Many parts of the NHS are beyond that. Jackie Bailey cited one. Attendances at A&E, for example, have gone beyond that, above what they were going into the pandemic. Cancer referrals, for example, urgent suspicion of cancer referrals are now 120% compared to April last year. So we are supporting the NHS. This is a difficult task, particularly for those on the front line, to make sure that the balance between COVID and non-COVID treatment is where it needs to be. The one thing I would say, and I say this genuinely because it relates back to my exchanges with Anna Sarwar earlier on, one of the big challenges we have right now is to make sure that we continue to manage COVID in a way that doesn't distract from the efforts of the NHS to deal with the backlog and get back to normal. And last year, when we talked about not overwhelming our NHS, at that point we had pretty much set aside the whole capacity of the NHS. Right now, that's different. The NHS is getting back to normal, so the margins around that are much tighter. And that's why, in answer to Anna Sarwar's question, why don't we just get back to normal in more areas more quickly, is because we have to take great care not to allow cases to rise in a way that generates more hospital admissions from COVID and sets back the recovery plan. This is all really important stuff, but it's also really complex stuff, and that balance right now is very sensitive, which is one of the main reasons why we continue, difficult though it is, and difficult though it is for many sectors, that we have to continue to be cautious as we navigate our way through these next few weeks.
Move on to supplementaries. I call Emma Harper to be followed by Jamie Green.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I ask the First Minister what action the Scottish Government is taking in response to high numbers of do not attends at COVID-19 vaccination clinics, and whether the Government are exploring innovative ways for vaccination team staff to contact those being vaccinated, such as text messaging, which could help ensure vaccine attendance? And I remind Chamber that I am a member of NHS Dumfries and Galloway's vaccination team.
First Minister.
Can I take the opportunity, first of all, Presiding Officer, again to thank everybody in our vaccination teams across the country, and I'm taking that opportunity generally, but also because Emma Harper is a member of our vaccination team, and as well as her responsibilities in this Parliament has been vaccinating people, so thank you to her, as well as the many others across the country. This is obviously one of the key priorities around the vaccination programme, given the stage it's at. The Health Secretary and I were engaged in a meeting earlier this morning about this very issue. The first thing to say is that uptake rates are very high, exceptionally high, and that is a really positive thing. They are slightly lower the further down the age spectrum we come, but still much higher than previous vaccination programmes. So we are looking now, given that we're at an advanced stage, at the different ways in which we can get people who, for whatever reason, haven't attended an appointment to now attend. So we're looking at more drop-in facilities, to look at more use of text and technology. Young people who registered on the portal will be getting their appointment by text already, but we need to go back and do a sweep to try and get to the people who haven't attended. So to reassure Emma Harper in the Chamber, there is a lot of work over the next few weeks will go into getting as many people vaccinated as possible. If we look at very briefly, Presiding Officer, case numbers right now, one of the factors Scotland is dealing with right now, and you see this in the ONS survey that's published weekly, is because we have generally over the last 15 months we've had lower infection rates, we've also got lower population immunity. So there's more of our population that is still susceptible. What does that mean? It means it's even more important for us to get as many people as possible vaccinated. So that is a key priority that all of us in the Scottish Government are absolutely focused on.
Jamie Green.
Thank you. Figures released this week tell a horrendous story of domestic abuse in Scotland, which has risen for the 4th year in a row, with some 63,000 incidents last year. Second to our drug crisis in Scotland, this too is our national shame. Education and prevention, of course, are important, but First Minister, so is punishment. So let me ask, how many perpetrators who would have historically received a custodial sentence did not, under the Government's presumption against short sentences? Because if the answer is more than one person, we really have to ask ourselves, what message does that send to the tens of thousands of victims of abuse, mostly women, about whose side justice is really on?
First Minister.
Can I, well, firstly, say, and I think every single one of us would agree with this, one case of domestic abuse is one too many. We should have a zero tolerance approach, and that is the approach the Scottish Government brings. There is an important point of context here that I think it is really important for all of us to understand. If we look at the year 2019-20, the figures that were reported last month, more than half of the rise in convictions were actually accounted for by the new offences under the new Domestic Abuse Act. So, in actual fact, it is because we have legislated to make more domestic abuse behaviour a criminal offence that we're seeing those numbers go up. So, nobody should ever celebrate the rise in cases of domestic abuse, but actually underlying these statistics is a sign that as a country, as a parliament, we have taken this even more seriously. Marsha Scott from Scottish Women's Aid, indeed, I'm quoting her here, although it is very early data, our new domestic abuse law shows signs of living up to its global gold standard label. In terms of punishments, as Jamie Green knows, and we've had debates in other contexts over the past few months about whether the separation of powers between Parliament and the judiciary and the criminal justice system are as robust as they should be. I think they are. But every member of this Parliament should know that I do not decide what punishment somebody gets once they are convicted of an offence. Yes, we set the statutory framework for that, but in terms of short sentences, actually this was in the question that was posed to me. It is a presumption against short sentences. The decision about whether or not any perpetrator goes to jail is not a decision for me or any member of the government.